the way I often do it as well is really try and connect community to those customer outcomes. What are you actually trying to achieve for the customer? What are you trying to target? I found that really powerful in some of my past roles. It speaks so much better to the executives as well. If you can use those insights and bring those insights in from customers. So can you get qualitative and quantitative insights from, say, either an insights team or from doing some customer interviews or surveys or something? Because that language is going to be much more powerful than your own to any exec in trying to either get money to take a community program off the ground from the start, or to get incremental budget to get it to take it to that next level.
Hey everyone, I'm Joel Premack, host of the Community-Led Growth Show. Today I'm joined by Laura Roth, marketing and community consultant. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Laura.
Thanks so much, Joel. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, it's kind of funny that we've taken our Twitter friendship, or Twittership as I call it, to now you being a guest on the show. So I'm glad to virtually meet you and so excited to have today's conversation with you.
I love that Twittership. I'm going to use that now. It's brilliant.
Thank you. I've tried just a little bit to gain it some traction in the world. So that was my shameless plug for it. But before we get into the meat of today's conversation, would you please give everyone a quick 30-second intro about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So I spent my career in the B2B SaaS and publishing industries, working in many different roles within community and marketing, including things like growth marketing, brand and comms, events, obviously community building itself. I've worked at mature startups and large corporates, been through 2 acquisitions, including one with WeWork a few years back. And I spent 6 years in New York City, which was great. And I'm now back in my hometown in London. Most recently, I was working on community strategy at Vodafone Business. And I would say I'm passionate about the real power of creating connections and how brands can really leverage that to really transform and make an exciting customer experience.
Awesome. I love that last part around the overall experience for customers. It's such a human element, and it's all about giving to others. I love that point of view. So I'm so excited to get into today's conversation with you, because we're talking about a couple things that I think community professionals need some content on, and I'm really passionate about just putting out there really the best, most helpful value add content for community professionals and people who are what I call community curious. They're thinking about dabbling in or dipping their toes into the world of community. So to start off today's conversation, when you've been in past roles at organizations, who've been your biggest allies for getting executive buy-in for launching a community?
Yes, I mean, this can really differ depending on kind of the setup of your company and how far along they are in the community building process. I think from my general experience, most of them have been senior stakeholders in sort of functions like marketing, customer success, sales, product. I mean, basically most of the functions around the company. But I've also worked very closely with the sort of heads of brand, digital transformation. And then in the larger companies, I think those regional directors are really important because they can be very different depending on which region, obviously, you're in, and it can make a real difference. But really, I would say that it can be almost anyone in a company who just gets it and gets the importance of community. And I think some of this is down to the person themselves. I wouldn't say everyone, say, who's a head of sales or head of customer success is going to love community, but certain people are going to have more of an interest in it. And it also just depends on how much the company has already started that education period of educating people in what community can actually do. Really, for me, I think ultimately it's about speaking their language. Whoever you're connecting with for executive buy-in, you've got to really think about what drives them, what really makes them sort of tick. What are the sort of key challenges? What are they trying to do? And if you can connect community to that, there's such a big power in that.
Yeah, it's almost like, to steal a phrase from a TV show episode I saw recently, like what keeps you up at night?
Yeah,
And if you can connect community to one of those, then there's there, I would imagine, be more likely to support you and your program and your efforts.
exactly that. It's like, how can you frame community as the solution to one of their problems?
Mhm.
And that's it's not a short-term game, it's a long-term game, and it's something that can take time. But once you start to sort of work through that, you can really start to gain that buy-in that really will make a difference to the success of your community program.
Awesome. Well, perfect segue from now we've got executive buy-in, hopefully, for our community strategy. Now it's time to get budget. How have you previously advocated for budget to build a community program? And like, I guess I am not just talking about like who have you possibly worked with, but also the how. Like, have you done a community roadshow internally? Have you budgeted for team members, tools, like all those sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things? Like, not just the high level, but also the tactical elements of it too.
Yeah, definitely. And this is where it's just really about connecting, taking it to that next level. How do you connect community strategy to the overall goals of the business? And you really have to understand the overall goals of the business to be able to do that. So that's one of the first things that you really need to do. So really ask yourself, what is your company trying to achieve in the next 3 months, 6 months, a year, and how could community help them succeed? And then you really start to look at how those different functions and what they're aiming to do and how community could help drive that. And the way I often do it as well is really try and connect community to those customer outcomes. What are you actually trying to achieve for the customer? What are you trying to target? I found that really powerful in some of my past roles. It speaks so much better to the executives as well. If you can use those insights and bring those insights in from customers. So can you get qualitative and quantitative insights from, say, either an insights team or from doing some customer interviews or surveys or something? Because that language is going to be much more powerful than your own to any exec in trying to either get money to take a community program off the ground from the start, or to get incremental budget to get it to take it to that next level. And yeah, I think the other key thing is, like, what are those key business drivers that really for building a community program? So what is it that's going to do for the business? That's the other side of the coin. Like, the customer thing is the first thing that you should always start with. But what are those business drivers that it's going to do on the other side? Like, maybe it's kind of like impacting NPS or reducing sort of customer churn or increasing customer retention, those kinds of things. But really trying to hone in on what those potential metrics could be from your community program. And then it's about sort of really showing the value that this can bring and the community can bring. And again, this takes time. It's not something like, as we all know, community metrics are really hard to measure. And, from the start, if you've got no budget and you're starting from scratch, this can be a really hard thing to do because you don't have a community up and running to really do that. So I look at it and think, how can I infuse community moments and community mindsets in existing programs that are already there, and try and really make those enhancements that start to provide opportunities for your community to connect together. So, for example, if there's an event or something that your company does, how could you maybe make it more interactive? How could you find a way for your community who are, say, maybe meeting up at that event either virtually or face to face? How could you add other elements that allow them to be able to connect to one another? And I sort of see those as kind of community moments that you can start to add. And if you can show the little value in a really small way, it's going to be a small way at the beginning because it's something that's incremental. Then you start to really get the traction of the executives when you can sort of show the enhancement that community could bring. So it's really about looking for those ways to more deeply engage.
I love that idea of like what you just said, especially that scenario of like it being an event, because you could do a special like happy hour and like connection center, whether virtually or in person. You could have a special guest speaker and like give your community members like access to them for like an extra 30 minutes or an hour, like AMA or separate like discussion. There are just so many cool, interesting things I think you could do with an event and to like weave in some element of community. So I love that example. Thank you so much for sharing that.
No problem. And I think, again, it's just about adding value. I think like this is the thing. You have to really try and educate stakeholders and into understanding, which can be one of the hardest, which is we are looking to add value to every kind of touch point with the customer, prospect, or whatever it is that you're trying to build a community around. And really just trying to just find that way to add value, but not expect anything in return, which is a really hard thing to get a lot of senior stakeholders' head around, because you're ultimately trying to get budget. You've got to show you're going to give something back in return. But I think that's why you've really got to build it as this long-term plan, that it's not, you're not going to get something back from every moment of value, but you're building this little, like, sort of almost like, it's like step by step, you're changing that perception, building that trust, building that customer advocacy and loyalty that takes their experience to another level, and in turn will really change those business drivers. Again, it's a really long-term game and a slow one at that sometimes.
I can definitely understand, but I also think that as you do more of like those more incremental moments, as you were talking about, I think you'll see like those early signs too. Like after the event, for example, in that one, did your moment or moments that you wove into it, are people still talking about them in your community? Are they sharing about it in social? Are they emailing you back and saying, oh my gosh, thank you so much. It was such a fun experience. So yeah. I think that there are like little moments and like little things that you can show like, hey, here's qualitative things. And because it's community, we can't be data driven, we're data informed. And so I like to say that because we can balance the qualitative with the quantitative at that point.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And if you can sort of wrap that up and make sure that you present it to execs wherever you can, that is exactly the kind of thing you've basically got to build and keep showing them. Anything in the words of a customer is always going to be more powerful than in the words of you. So whatever you can get in that is worth everything.
I love that. Definitely, it's worth everything and then some probably too. Yeah. So we've talked about getting buy-in and budget. You mentioned some of the goals that I think community can definitely impact, but I'd love to hear if there are any other specific goals that you've rallied executives around to get buy-in and support for a community program to impact in a business.
Yeah, I mean, from a sort of organizational perspective, it's definitely, the things that I mentioned, like the NPS scores and that sort of reduced customer churn, I find is really good. I think there's also sort of slightly different kinds of things, like the fact that you can glean more regular customer insights, especially in a large organization. You do these big insight research projects, which are amazing, but they're quite slow in being able to really find and get that information from, say, a customer team to be able to get right through to the rest of the business. And the power of a community to be able to provide that on a more regular basis and much more in real time is huge. So I think that particularly is a huge one that I've used in the past and had real success with. And then the side of the one that's maybe slightly harder to measure, but again, it's more like the qualitative stuff that you mentioned just before, which is about that improving of the customer experience. I think, in this day and age, like, the customer experience is everything. There's so much competition, especially in the B2B SaaS space, that if you don't have a good customer experience, you're just not going to retain people. So if you can show that your community value adds effectively are having that impact and changing and transforming the way people are working and doing and kind of connecting with each other, that is so powerful, and more powerful than anything else really that you could do. Awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I definitely love that addition of customer experience being an impact that, or a metric or a point, I guess, really, that community can impact. for the business overall, and like the almost like affinity that can then drive to customers and users.
Yeah, definitely.
So now that we've talked about buy-in, you have hopefully launched your community, things are going well. What are tips for working cross-functionally within your organization? Because as you mentioned sometimes people from marketing, you mentioned people from sales, you mentioned product, success, or customer experience. So with all those stakeholders who might have like a piece of the pie and an interest in community, how have you previously worked cross-functionally with them? And yeah, I guess I just wanted to spill it, like just spill it all.
Yeah, oh, there's so much I can say on this. So, okay, so I mean, my number one thing is keep people involved in the process. I think this is like, I can't stress this enough. People support what they can help create. It is actually almost the exact same idea as what you put in for your community that you need to basically employ internally as well to get people to care about community. So if you find a way to keep them involved, ask them for feedback, make them feel like they are a part of where this process is going. And after that, make sure you actually listen to the feedback. Obviously, you can't always implement every piece of feedback, but make sure you're building that relationship and going back to that person and saying, hey, thanks so much for this piece of feedback. I'm going to include this, or I'm going to do this, or I can't do this right now, but we're going to do this. But make sure they know they've been listened to. And again, it just goes back to basic building human relationship strategy, which is the same as what we're trying to do on the community on the outside. Again, it is just, how do you show somebody that you care about something and then really bring them in and just make sure that they're involved? So the next part of that is you have to insert yourself into as many conversations as you can across the business. Now, this is a lot harder post-COVID when, some companies are barely in the office at all. Obviously, even some people are more hybrid, some are going in more, but you have less of that coffee chat at the coffee machine, which is often where you would maybe, sometimes I would go into the office and someone would say to me, oh, actually, we've got this meeting like later on, you should really be in it. And this is kind of something that obviously it's harder to do when you're not in the office. But if there's ways that you can sort of meet people and find ways to make sure that you are involved in these conversations, that again comes back to really knowing about what's going on in the company and what the other functions' priorities are. So you have to keep that regular cadence of contact with these people to keep making sure that you're going to be able to sort of involve them and include them and keep them brought into your community ideas, and then have some fun with it. I mean, I remember like back in when I was in New York, I was once, actually this was when I was managing a customer conference for our company and a prospect conference, and we had a lot of ideas that we needed some stakeholder buy-in for, and I just thought, well, you know what, let's find a way to get them involved. And so we did a bagel breakfast, and we just basically brought in a load of bagels and a big breakfast into the office and invited every stakeholder to come in and give some views and feedback on some of our ideas, and obviously get bagels and have a chat and everything. And honestly, we had such good conversations in there. It was something so small, but what it was, again, it's just a way of making people feel included in that next part of the process. And so it's something so small, and maybe you have to be a bit creative in how you might do that, especially now if people are in different parts of the world. But it makes such a difference if you can do things like that, to really try and get them involved. Also, regional allies. Again, if you're in a bigger company and you've got people in different places, make sure you're taking the time to understand those different cultures that are happening within your community, because you will need to adapt things to suit certain areas. Like there are some cities or countries where it's harder to get people to maybe meet up after the office, for example. So there's no point putting an event on after office hours because they're just not going to come. Maybe in another place they will. Make sure you're really getting those regional stakeholders on board by understanding what it is that they are trying to do and what their different cultures are. I think that's probably a pretty good roundup.
No, I think that that's awesome. And I love that you actually hit on so many different points because it's not a one-dimensional question.
Yes.
And that's why I kind of wanted to like leave it so open-ended, is so that you would share anything and everything with us. Because I love that you hit on everything from like an in-person bagel breakfast for executives and other stakeholders to share feedback on your ideas for an event, all the way to like, hey, you also have to be mindful of like norms, whether they're cultural or communication, etc., of different countries or cities or other areas in the world. To me, I view that as like just being extremely DEIB minded with your approach, because as you continue to expand and grow your community, there are going to be people from more and more backgrounds, hopefully, in it and participating. So therefore, you have to learn like the norms, you have to learn how and what their day-to-day looks like, and like how to be inclusive of them and create space that makes them feel like that they belong in your community.
Absolutely. That stuff is so important, especially when you're looking for potential community members to step up and take more responsibility within your community. You need to really make sure that you're focusing on that diversity piece and making sure you're giving equal opportunities around to your community members. And then, yeah, just back to your one size doesn't fit all kind of is really important one to think about with stakeholders. Remember, at the end of the day, a senior stakeholder is just like a community member. They are a person, and everyone's driven by different motivations. So I think that is something to always keep in the back of your mind. Try things, test things. Certain people will jump at some things and certain people will jump at others, and that's okay. But ultimately, you're building a relationship with someone. So just provide that value to them in the same way that you would to your community members. And you'll find that starts coming back to you in so many ways.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We are coming close on time. So to take us to the finish line for today's chat, what are the 3 community trends that you're most excited for within the B2B SaaS space that you're watching for in 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many at the moment, isn't there? It's such an interesting space. Okay, so I think like my first one, and it kind of aligns with a bit of a personal interest of mine as well, is really about that rise in the communities and the talent space. I think we're going to see so much more of this use of community as a sort of employer brand campaign, if you like. There's so many ways that communities can be used for that, like in terms of sort of attracting new talent or helping to develop existing talent, or in the enterprise like or alumni space. There's like huge ways that communities can be used in that way. I've just been added myself to a Facebook group just from recently from one of my previous companies of an alumni group, and it really has got me thinking into how many opportunities and how much people could help each other that it maybe didn't even work at a company at the same time, but they've kind of got something connecting them. And I think there's just so much that we're going to see in that space. So that's my first one for that. The second one, I think, comes down to the technology side of things. And I think that we're going to see so much more innovation and functionality in the tech that's provided for communities, professionals. I think there is already a huge amount of competition in that area. So there's just going to be even more because community professionals are demanding so much more data that I think the tech kind of sort of platforms are having to really kind of start to think a little bit more holistically about what that service and technology is actually going to provide and how they can sort of be better than their competitors. And that can only be good for us as an industry. So that's my number 2. And the number 3, my third one, would be about the rise, I think, in using communities for the greater good and for a bigger purpose. I think given the kind of harder economic times that we're living through and everything, there's potentially, I think, a really big opportunity for communities to support each other in a way that goes bit further beyond the product or the brand that they're actually originally created around, and really looks at how people can support each other through other things that are going on in their lives. And so that's sort of more using it for the greater good. So I could see that happening a little bit more in the future, and certainly in the next year.
Awesome. That's so exciting. I love that idea of doing something greater outside of like just what's meaningful to them as customers, or for you and your organization, like product related and business centered. Like I love like, how can we maybe give back? How can we support each other at like that human level?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I'm now really excited for that trend. I'm like, ooh, I want to see what people do with this. But Laura, thank you again for being on the Commute-Led Growth Show today. If people want to follow and or connect with you, what are the best handles and or channels for them to do so?
Oh, yeah. So you can find me on Twitter at Laura Roth. So that's an easy one. And on LinkedIn, I'm also Laura Roth straight on there as well. Yeah, I'm open on any of those. Please feel free to get in contact or send me a DM. I'm always happy to connect with other community professionals and people who are interested in this space. So absolutely happy to connect with people.
Awesome. Thank you so much and have a great day.
You too. Thanks so much, Joel.